Get your little black ass out of my seat now. First class isn't for affirmative action charity cases like you. The words slashed through the cabin like shrapnel, causing nearby passengers to physically recoil. Several gasps punctuated the sudden silence that followed. William Barnes, a tall executive with silver-streaked hair and an expensive watch that caught the overhead lights, loomed over seat 2A, whiskey fumes emanating from his breath. His face had flushed to a dangerous shade of crimson, veins visibly pulsing at his temples. In the seat sat Noah Montgomery, a 9-year-old boy whose polished loafers barely touched the floor. His small hands gripped the armrests until his knuckles whitened against his brown skin. Though his face maintained remarkable composure, a slight tremor in his lower lip betrayed his inner turmoil. Beads of sweat formed at his hairline, and his heart hammered so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it. "This is my assigned seat, sir," Noah replied, his voice quiet but steady, despite the slight quaver. He reached for the tablet in his leather backpack, with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. "I have the boarding pass right here. I don't give a damn what kind of mistake the airline made." Barnes sneered, his voice rising as spittle flew from his lips. "I've had this exact seat for 15 years. Every London flight." He gestured dismissively at Noah's tablet. "Look at you. You probably wandered in from economy with some fake ticket. First class is for real passengers who earn their way here, not little imposters playing dress-up." A flight attendant with a tight blonde bun hurried down the aisle, the scent of her floral perfume momentarily cutting through the tension. Her professional smile strained under pressure, a slight tick visible at the corner of her left eye. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice immediately." "We can. I will not lower my voice until this situation is fixed." Barnes cut her off, looming closer to Noah until the boy could feel the man's hot breath on his face. "I paid $4,000 for this seat. Get the boy back to where he belongs." Noah remained still, his back straight, despite the eyes of every first-class passenger now fixed on him. The cabin lights seemed suddenly too bright, the leather seat too slick beneath his sweaty palms. He focused on his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, just as his father had taught him. A woman across the aisle lowered her magazine, her silver hair elegantly coiffed, her piercing blue eyes assessing the situation with clinical precision. Nearby, a young man with a nose ring discreetly raised his phone, the red recording light blinking steadily. "My father purchased this seat for me." Noah explained his composure, remarkable, despite the rapid pounding of his heart against his ribs. "I'm flying to London for a business meeting." Barnes let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed off the cabin walls. "A business meeting? What are you, some diversity poster child?" He leaned in closer, his expensive cologne mingling with alcohol fumes. "Let me guess your daddy got lucky with some government contract, and now Junior gets to play businessman too." The flight attendant Sophia, according to her name tag, stepped between them, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Sir, please, there are children present." But Barnes wasn't finished. He stepped around Sophia and leaned closer to Noah, his voice dropping to a stage whisper everyone could still hear. "Listen, kid, people like you don't belong in 2A. That's just how the world works. So why don't you go back to wherever you came from and stop pretending?" Noah's throat tightened painfully, a burning sensation creeping behind his eyes. He blinked rapidly, determined not to cry. The small watch on his wrist, a gift from his father, suddenly felt heavy, a reminder of who he was and what was expected of him. What no one yet realized was that in exactly 7 minutes, this London-bound aircraft would be ordered back to the gate. In 9 minutes, airport security would board to remove a passenger. And by tomorrow morning, William Barnes's face would be splashed across every news outlet in America, his career in freefall. But most importantly, no one yet knew that the quiet boy in seat 2A was Noah Montgomery, son of Julian Montgomery, founder and CEO of Nexus Quantum and the fifth richest man in America. Noah Montgomery had never been an ordinary child. At 9 years old, he could explain quantum encryption protocols that confused most adults, could speak 3 languages fluently, and had already developed a simple AI algorithm that his father's company was incorporating into their security infrastructure. But sitting in seat 2A with a red-faced man towering over him, Noah felt every bit his age, small, vulnerable, and fighting back tears that burned behind his eyes. He wouldn't cry, though. His father had taught him that composure was essential, especially in hostile situations. Dignity is armor they can't pierce. Julian had told him once, straightening Noah's tie before a board meeting where the boy would present his algorithm to skeptical executives. Noah's fingers found the small watch on his wrist, a child-sized replica of his father's vintage Patek Philippe, a gift for his last birthday. The cool metal against his skin grounded him. But what truly anchored him was the worn silver compass nestled in his pocket, his mother's childhood treasure that he carried everywhere. He slipped his fingers into his pocket and felt its familiar contours, drawing strength from this tactile connection to her. He was Noah Montgomery, son of Julian Montgomery, heir to Nexus Quantum and its $30 billion empire. But he was also just a boy who missed his mother. Olivia Montgomery had died 2 years ago in a car accident that Noah survived without a scratch. The physical therapy for Julian's injuries had taken months, but the emotional wounds seemed impossible to heal. Since then, his father had become intensely protective, building a fortress around their life that few people penetrated. Noah stared out the window at the tarmac, trying to focus on the meeting awaiting him in London, rather than the man still standing in the aisle. Through the plexiglass, ground crew scurried about in the morning sunlight, their fluorescent vests glowing against the gray concrete. The familiar rumble of jet engines vibrated through the cabin, usually a comforting sound that now only heightened his anxiety. His father had been preparing him for this trip for weeks, his first international business journey, where he would sit in on the acquisition talks for Thornfield Data Systems. Julian believed in immersing Noah in the business from an early age, just as his own father had done. The Montgomery men build legacies. His father often said the scent of his sandalwood cologne, filling the space between them. And legacies require apprenticeship. Sometimes Noah wished he could just play video games like other kids, or join a soccer team, or have friends over without their parents signing extensive NDAs. But he also loved the exclusive world his father had built for them, filled with innovation, brilliance, and purpose. He loved the pride in his father's eyes when he grasped a complex concept or offered an insightful observation during meetings. Now, feeling the stares of the other passengers burning into him, Noah tried to channel his father's confidence. Julian Montgomery never apologized for taking up space, for being successful, for being who he was. Noah straightened his back and met William Barnes's glare directly. "This is my seat," he repeated more firmly this time. "The boarding pass has my name on it. Noah Montgomery." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Barnes's face at the name, but it quickly hardened back to indignation. Montgomery? Never heard of it. Some new rapper or basketball player, I suppose. Noah didn't bother correcting him. His father had explained that some people would always try to minimize their achievements, to explain away black success as luck or special treatment rather than intelligence and hard work. The best response wasn't argument, but excellence. The flight attendant Sophia, according to her name tag, checked her tablet, the blue glow illuminating her concerned face. "Mr. Barnes, I can see there's been a confusion with the seating. Mr. Montgomery's reservation for seat 2A was made 3 weeks ago. Your usual seat preference was changed during online check-in this morning. That's impossible. Barnes snapped his expensive tie, now slightly askew. I never changed anything. This is some kind of... Sir Sophia interrupted with strained patience. I can offer you seat 2C, which is identical to this one just across the aisle. I don't want 2C. I want my seat. The one I always have. Barnes's voice rose again, causing a baby in business class to start whimpering. Noah glanced across the aisle at the silver-haired woman who hadn't returned to her magazine. She was watching the scene unfold with an expression that combined disapproval and clinical interest, as if observing a psychological case study. Her perfume, something classic and expensive, wafted across the aisle. She caught Noah's eye and gave him a slight nod of encouragement before addressing Barnes. Young man, she said to Noah, ignoring Barnes completely. Are you traveling alone? Before Noah could answer, a commotion at the front of the cabin drew everyone's attention. The distinct sound of heavy, purposeful footsteps approached, and Noah felt a wave of relief wash over him. A stocky Hispanic man, in an impeccable suit, strode purposefully toward them, his face set in professional concern. A scar ran along his left jawline, barely visible, but hinting at a history far removed from corporate security. His presence seemed to physically push against the air in the cabin, creating space through sheer force of personality. Mr. Montgomery. He called, his voice carrying authority, despite its controlled volume. Is there a problem here? Noah felt his shoulders relax, incrementally. Mr. Rodriguez, he acknowledged with the formality his father insisted on in public. Miguel Rodriguez, head of security for the Montgomery family, took in the scene with a quick, practiced scan. His eyes narrowed at Barnes, still standing over Noah, his hand instinctively moving toward the concealed holster beneath his jacket, before he caught himself, and instead positioned himself protectively beside the boy. Who the hell are you? Barnes demanded, straightening his posture to match Miguel's. Miguel Rodriguez, head of security for the Montgomery family. Miguel replied coolly, the slight accent of his Puerto Rican heritage evident in his precise pronunciation. And you are causing a disturbance involving my principal. Miguel's hand came to rest gently on Noah's shoulder, and Noah could feel the man's calloused palm through the fabric of his blazer, a tangible reminder that he wasn't alone. The scent of Miguel's mentholated aftershave, so different from his father's expensive cologne, was suddenly the most comforting smell in the world. The dynamics in the cabin shifted instantly, the air crackling with a new tension as passengers began to whisper among themselves, realization dawning that the boy might be more important than they'd assumed. 24 hours before the confrontation, at 35,000 feet, Julian Montgomery stood in his Manhattan penthouse, watching the October rain lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Thunder rumbled in the distance, vibrating through the glass. The city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board of light and possibility, a circuit board he had spent 15 years mastering. The scent of brewing coffee mingled with the distinctive petrichor that seeped in. Despite the sealed windows, Olivia had always loved that smell. She would open the terrace doors during rainstorms, letting the fresh, damp air fill their home. It smells like new beginnings, she'd say, her laughter echoing off the marble floors. Julian closed his eyes briefly at the memory, his fingers automatically reaching for the wedding band he still wore. At 42, he had built Nexus Quantum from a dorm room idea into the world's leading quantum security company. His innovations in quantum encryption had revolutionized digital banking, cybersecurity, and data protection. The Financial Times had recently valued his company at $78 billion, making him the second richest black man in America. None of that mattered as much as the boy sitting cross-legged on the Italian leather sofa, studying a specialized tablet with unusual focus for a 9-year-old. The soft glow from the device illuminated Noah's features, so like Olivia's that sometimes it physically hurt to look at him. Daddy Noah called, not looking up from his screen, the sound of his small fingers tapping against glass punctuating the silence. Thornfield's quantum computing division shows inconsistent results in their Q3 reports. Their entanglement stability only reaches 97.3%, when industry standard is 99.1%. Is that why we're acquiring them? To fix their approach. Julian covered the mouthpiece of his phone, a rare smile softening his features. That's exactly what I want you to mention in the meeting tomorrow. Into the phone, he added, My son just identified the Thornfield quantum computing issue. Did your Harvard MBA catch that, Jacob? Without waiting for an answer, he ended the call and moved to sit beside his son. The leather sofa creaked softly as he settled his weight. The movement was deliberate and controlled like everything else in his life. Mr. Phillips, angry again? Noah asked, referring to the board chairman. He finally looked up. His dark eyes. Olivia's eyes searching his father's face. Julian sighed, the weight of his responsibilities momentarily visible in the slump of his shoulders. Mr. Phillips doesn't understand what we're building, Noah. He sees quarterly profits. We see generations. The boy nodded solemnly, absorbing his father's words like scripture. Since his mother's passing, Noah had clung to these moments, these snippets of wisdom that connected him to the towering figure his father had become in both their private world and the public eye. Mom would have understood, Noah said quietly, his fingers unconsciously moving to the pocket where he kept her compass. Julian felt the familiar tightness in his chest whenever Olivia was mentioned. For a moment, he could smell her jasmine perfume, hear the soft padding of her bare feet across the hardwood floors. Yes, he agreed, his voice momentarily losing its edge. She always saw the bigger picture. He checked his watch, the same model as Noah's, but adult-sized. It's getting late. London is 5 hours ahead. We should both get some sleep. Can Isabella make me pancakes before we leave? Noah asked suddenly, just an ordinary 9-year-old looking forward to his housekeeper's famous breakfast. The ones with blueberries, shaped like a smiley face. Already arranged. Julian confirmed, tapping his son's tablet. And I've had Ms. Lawson update your briefing materials. The Thornfield CEO has a granddaughter about your age. Her name is Lily. Being friendly with her might help smooth things. Noah frowned, the expression transforming his face into a miniature version of Julian's own scowl. You want me to manipulate a kid? Julian paused, caught off guard by his son's perception. These moments reminded him how carefully he must tread, balancing raising a business successor with raising a good man. Olivia would have known what to say. She always did. No, Noah. I want you to be yourself. But in our world, he searched for the right words. The storm outside intensifying as if to match his internal struggle. Connections matter. Friendship matters. Your mother taught me that. A memory flashed unbidden, Olivia laughing, as she dragged Julian from a stuffy charity gala to dance in a sudden summer downpour, her white dress clinging to her skin, her eyes alive with a joy he'd never known before her. Connections aren't transactions, Julian, she'd said, water streaming down her face. They're life itself. The boy seemed satisfied with this answer. Julian helped him gather his things, noticing how small Noah's shoulders looked beneath the weight of the expectations being placed on them. Sometimes in quiet moments like these, doubt crept in. Was he pushing too hard? Would Olivia approve of how he was raising their son? But there was no time for doubts in Julian Montgomery's carefully constructed world. By this time tomorrow, they would be in London, closing a deal worth billions, another step in building the legacy he was determined to leave for his son, a legacy that proved excellence knew no color, no age, no limit. What Julian didn't know as they rode the private elevator down to their waiting car was that he was about to face a challenge no amount of money or power had prepared him for. And it would begin with his son sitting in seat 2A, confronted by a man who saw only color, not character. Dawn broke over the Montgomerys' Central Park West penthouse, golden light spilling across imported marble floors and illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The scent of Isabella Ramirez's buttermilk pancakes, a recipe passed down from her grandmother in Puerto Rico, wafted through the 11,000-square-foot apartment, mingling with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. The distant honking of morning traffic filtered up from the streets below a urban symphony that Noah had learned to tune out. From somewhere in the apartment came the soft sound of classical music Bach's Cello Suite No. 1, Olivia's favorite piece, which Julian still played every morning, as if she might somehow hear it. Noah sat at the breakfast bar, his boarding pass already loaded on his tablet, his monogrammed luggage waiting by the door. Unlike most children his age, excited jitters about flying were replaced by a focused review of the Thornfield Data System's financial projections. Still, when Isabella slid a perfectly formed Mickey Mouse pancake in front of him, complete with blueberry eyes and a raspberry smile, his serious expression melted into a delighted grin. "Your father wants you to eat well before the flight," Isabella said, her warm accent softening her words. The sleeves of her crisp white blouse were rolled up, revealing forearms strong from decades of work. A delicate gold cross hung around her neck, catching the morning light. She'd been with the family since before Noah was born, one of the few constants in his life after his mother's passing. First-class food isn't what it used to be, even on those fancy private flights you take. "We're flying commercial today," Noah informed her, carefully cutting his pancake. The maple syrup pooled on the plate, and he methodically dipped each bite before eating it. "Daddy says sometimes we need to move through the world like everyone else. It builds character." Isabella raised an eyebrow but said nothing. In her 15 years working for the ultra-wealthy, she'd learned when questions weren't welcome. Instead, she placed another pancake on his plate and gently ruffled his meticulously trimmed hair, a small act of affection she knew Julian Montgomery would never show in public. "Tu madre estaría tan orgullosa," she murmured softly. "Your mother would be so proud," a phrase. She only spoke in Spanish, as if the language provided a privacy that English couldn't. It was their small ritual, a way of keeping Olivia present. "Where is Daddy?" Noah asked, glancing at his watch, a habit mirrored from his father. The metal band was still slightly too big for his wrist, but he refused to have it adjusted. It was his father's size, he'd explained when Isabella suggested having links removed. "Emergency call?" Isabella replied, hesitating slightly. She wiped her hands on her apron, a nervous gesture that caught Noah's attention immediately. "Some problem with the Connecticut research facility. Mr. Rodriguez will be taking you to the airport. Your father will meet you at the gate." Noah's face fell slightly before he could control it. "I see," he said, his voice mimicking his father's business-like tone perfectly. "That's fine. I have the briefing materials to review anyway." Isabella watched him retreat behind the mask of composure he was learning to wear. So similar to his father's, she remembered when he used to cry when Julian canceled plans, back when Olivia was still alive. Now at 9, he accepted disappointment with a resignation that broke her heart. "Es demasiado joven para ser tan serio," she muttered to herself. "He's too young to be so serious," as she turned back to the stove. "He's doing his best, you know," she said softly, switching back to English. "Since your mama passed." "I know," Noah cut her off with a politeness that somehow made it worse. "Nexus Quantum is important. It's our legacy." He recited the words like a mantra, one Isabella had heard too many times. She wanted to tell him that being 9 was also important, that laughing and playing and making messes were part of his legacy too. But those weren't her lessons to teach. "Your mother," she said carefully, watching his reaction. She would want you to enjoy the flight, to look out the window, to order ice cream if they have it. Noah looked up, surprised. Ice cream for breakfast? Isabella winked. What happens on the plane stays on the plane. See? For a moment, the serious little businessman vanished, replaced by a child with a conspiratorial grin. I won't tell if you won't. An hour later, Noah sat in the back of a black Escalade Miguel Rodriguez in the front seat beside the driver. The streets of Manhattan blurred past the morning sun, reflecting off glass skyscrapers and creating patterns of light that danced across Noah's face as he stared out the window. Miguel adjusted the rearview mirror to keep an eye on his young charge. The boy was absorbed in his tablet, but Miguel noticed the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he kept checking his watch. The security chief had been with the Montgomerys for 5 years, joining the team just before Olivia's death. He'd seen firsthand how Julian had changed after the accident, how the protective walls had gone up around both father and son. Your father asked me to give you this, Miguel said, passing back a small box wrapped in simple black paper. Noah opened it carefully, the sound of tearing paper unnaturally loud in the quiet car. Inside was a pair of cufflinks, platinum, with a small sapphire in each center. A note in his father's precise handwriting read, For my son who shines brighter than any star, wear these to the meeting. Make them see what I see. Something tightened in Noah's chest. The blue of the sapphires matched his mother's eyes, exactly a detail his father would never mention, but would never forget. He slipped the cufflinks into his pocket without comment, but Miguel noticed the boy blink rapidly before returning to his tablet. My father was in the military, Miguel said suddenly, breaking protocol by sharing personal information. When I was about your age, he was deployed overseas. Before he left, he gave me his dog tags to keep until he returned. Noah looked up, curiosity replacing the carefully controlled expression. Were you scared? Miguel nodded, the memory still vivid after 30 years. Terrified. But having his tags made me feel like a part of him was still with me. Noah's hand moved to his pocket, where Miguel knew he kept his mother's compass. Did he come back? He did, Miguel confirmed. And when I gave the tags back, he told me I'd been braver than he was. It was the most personal conversation they'd ever had, a small crack in the professional barrier Miguel maintained as part of the Montgomery security detail. But something told him the boy needed it. Today needed to know that fear and bravery could coexist, that it was normal to seek connection through objects, through memories. At JFK, the Special Services team met them curbside. Noah was whisked through a private security line, his father's status opening doors that remained closed to most travelers. Miguel stayed with him until they reached the first-class lounge. Your father will meet you here, Miguel explained, checking his watch. His helicopter was delayed leaving Connecticut, but he'll make it before boarding. Noah nodded, settling into a leather chair positioned to view both the entrance and the runway beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He ordered an apple juice, no ice, with a twist of lemon from an attendant, who smiled indulgently at his grown-up demeanor. 1 hour passed, then another. Noah maintained his position, occasionally checking his watch against the departure board. Miguel made quiet phone calls in the corner, his expression growing increasingly concerned. Finally, his phone rang. Miguel listened, then approached Noah. There's a situation at the Connecticut facility, he said, choosing his words carefully. Your father, he won't make the flight. Noah absorbed this news with practiced composure, though Miguel noticed the subtle tightening of his grip on the armrests. I see. Will we be rebooking? Miguel shook his head. No. Your father wants you to proceed to London. He'll take the company jet once this situation is resolved, probably late tonight. Mr. Foster will meet you at Heathrow. I'm flying alone. For the first time, Noah sounded his age, a hint of uncertainty creeping into his voice. The lounge suddenly seemed too large, too noisy, the murmur of conversations, and the clink of glassware overwhelming. You'll have the best care, first class all the way. I'll escort you to the plane myself and confirm your flight attendant knows to keep a special eye on you. Miguel knelt to Noah's level, the scent of his aftershave mingling with the leather and coffee aromas of the lounge. Your father wouldn't suggest this if he didn't think you could handle it. He says you're ready. Those last 3 words straightened Noah's spine. Ready. His father believed he was ready. Of course, he said, gathering his tablet. I am a Montgomery after all. As they approached the gate, Miguel received another call. I need to take this. It's your father, he told Noah. Wait right here where I can see you. Don't move. Noah nodded, standing obediently by a pillar as Miguel stepped away, phone pressed to his ear. The boy watched the bustling terminal, observing the choreography of travel, the hurried business people, families wrangling children and luggage, airline staff directing the flow. The scent of cinnamon rolls from a nearby bakery wafted through the air, mingling with the less pleasant odors of jet fuel and too many bodies in an enclosed space. The boarding announcement for first-class passengers came over the PA system, the female voice echoing slightly in the cavernous terminal. Miguel was still on the phone, gesturing emphatically. Noah looked at his boarding pass, then at the gate, where passengers were already forming a line. His father had raised him to be punctual, to show initiative. Making a decision. Noah approached the gate agent. Excuse me, he said, his voice clear and confident, despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. I'm Noah Montgomery. I have a first-class ticket. He presented his digital boarding pass. The gate agent smiled down at him, her lipstick a bright red against her pale skin. Where are your parents, sweetheart? My father was delayed on business. His security chief is just over there. Noah pointed toward Miguel, still engaged in his phone call. He said I should board. The agent looked doubtful until she scanned the boarding pass. The name Montgomery triggered a special notation in the system, VIP high-value customer special handling. Her demeanor shifted subtly. Of course, Mr. Montgomery. Let me check with my supervisor. A quick conference with her colleague, both glancing at Miguel, who seemed to be watching while talking, led to a decision. We'll escort you on board now. Would you like your security to come with you? Noah considered. His father always said, showing independence builds respect. That won't be necessary. Mr. Rodriguez needs to complete his call. The gate agent signaled to a flight attendant who came forward to escort Noah down the jetway, the smell of stale air and cleaning products growing stronger as they approached the aircraft. Miguel, seeing this, gave Noah a questioning look. The boy held up his boarding pass and pointed to the plane. Miguel nodded, holding up one finger 1 minute. On board, Noah was shown to his seat, 2A, a window seat in the first row of first class. The flight attendant helped him stow his backpack, the leather buttery soft against his fingers. Are you traveling by yourself, Mr. Montgomery? She asked, noting his name on the manifest. Yes. My father will join me in London tonight. He settled into the wide seat, arranging his tablet on the tray table. The leather seat was cool beneath him, the cabin quiet, except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. Well, you're in good hands. I'm Sophia, and I'll be taking care of you during our flight. Can I get you anything before we finish boarding? Water, no ice, please, he requested, already turning his attention to his tablet. As Sophia went to fetch his water, Noah gazed out the window. He'd flown dozens of times, but usually on his father's private jet. This was different, exciting in its own way. He was proving himself. His father would be proud when he heard how Noah handled everything independently. The cabin gradually filled behind him. Noah sipped his water, reviewed his notes on Thornfield data, and mentally prepared for the meeting tomorrow. He'd need to be sharp, especially now that he might be arriving without his father. He imagined impressing the Thornfield executives with his knowledge, making his father proud. Then a shadow fell across his tablet. Noah looked up to see a man standing in the aisle staring down at him with an expression that quickly morphed from confusion to anger. "What the hell is this?" the man demanded, looking from Noah to his boarding pass and back again. "There's been some mistake. This is my seat." And just like that, the carefully constructed world Julian Montgomery had built for his son began to crumble. "I've already explained that this is my assigned seat," Noah repeated, struggling to maintain the composure his father had drilled into him. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his fingertips, his throat constricting painfully. The cabin suddenly seemed too warm, the air too thin. William Barnes's face darkened to a dangerous shade of red veins standing out on his forehead. His expensive suit couldn't hide the tremor of rage that ran through him as he loomed over the child. A drop of sweat trickled down his temple, despite the cool cabin air. Several passengers were now openly staring, and at least 3 phones were recording the confrontation, their camera lenses glinting in the overhead lighting. "Listen, kid." Barnes lowered his voice to a menacing whisper, leaning in until Noah could smell the whiskey on his breath and the expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask it. "I don't know what game you're playing, but I've sat in 2A on this flight for 15 years. 15 years. His spittle landed on Noah's tablet screen. "I'm a Diamond Elite member with over 3 million miles. I'm not about to be bumped by some affirmative action charity case." Noah flinched at the words, but kept his expression neutral. His hands, however, gripped the armrests tighter, his knuckles almost white against his brown skin. Under his pressed shirt, he could feel cold sweat trickling down his spine. Sophia returned with Noah's water, immediately sensing the tension. The glass was sweating, creating a small puddle on the napkin beneath it. "Mr. Barnes, is there a problem?" Her voice was tight, professional, but her eyes darted nervously between the man and the child. "Yes, there's a problem." Barnes snapped his tie, now slightly askew, as he jabbed a finger toward Noah. "This child is in my seat. My seat. Check your system again." As Sophia pulled out her tablet, the silver-haired woman across the aisle spoke up. "Young man," she addressed Noah directly, her voice carrying the cultured tones of old money and education. "My name is Dr. Eleanor Preston. Are you traveling to London alone?" Noah nodded, grateful for the distraction from Barnes's glare. The woman's perfume, something classic with notes of jasmine and amber, reminded him fleetingly of his mother. "I've been watching this disgraceful behavior," Dr. Preston continued now, looking at Barnes with undisguised contempt. Her pearl earrings caught the light as she turned her head. "And I'm appalled that a grown man would speak to a child this way, regardless of any seating confusion." Barnes turned his glare on her, his face now almost purple. "This doesn't concern you, lady." "I beg to differ, Doctor," Preston replied calmly, setting her magazine aside with deliberate slowness. "I'm a retired pediatrician with 40 years of experience in child development and welfare. The psychological impact of public humiliation on children is very much my concern." She removed her reading glasses, letting them hang from a delicate chain around her neck. "Moreover, I've spent the last decade studying the specific effects of racial aggression on the developing psyche. Your behavior, sir, is textbook." A murmur ran through the first-class cabin. Barnes looked around suddenly, aware of the audience he'd attracted. His expression flickered between anger and the first hint of uncertainty as he registered the numerous phones now openly recording. Sophia checked her tablet again, the blue screen reflecting in her worried eyes. "Mr. Barnes, I've verified that Mr. Montgomery was indeed assigned seat 2A. Your reservation shows seat 2C. There appears to have been a change when you checked in via the app this morning." "That's impossible." Barnes sputtered, drops of saliva flying. "I never change my seat. Never. This is some kind of He stopped abruptly as Miguel Rodriguez appeared at the cabin entrance, scanning first class until his eyes locked on the situation unfolding at 2A. His face hardened as he took in the scene. Noah cornered a red-faced man looming over him, passengers recording with their phones. Mr. Montgomery Miguel called, his voice carrying easily through the cabin as he strode forward. The subtle scent of his aftershave preceded him, a clean, mentholated smell that somehow made Noah feel safer. "Is there a problem here?" Barnes turned, momentarily thrown by the arrival of the imposing security chief, with his military bearing and tailored suit that didn't quite conceal the shoulder holster beneath. "Who the hell are you?" Barnes demanded, his hand tightening on his briefcase until his knuckles whitened. Miguel ignored him, focusing solely on Noah. His eyes quickly assessed the boy for any signs of distress. "Are you all right, sir?" The "sir" wasn't lost on anyone within earshot, the respect with which this grown man addressed a 9-year-old boy. Sir Barnes sputtered, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. "He's a kid in 2A. My seat." Miguel now turned his attention to Barnes, his expression coolly professional, but with steel beneath. His scar, a thin white line along his jawline, from a security detail gone wrong years before, seemed to stand out more prominently against his suddenly tense face. "This is Noah Montgomery, son of Julian Montgomery, CEO of Nexus Quantum. He has been assigned seat 2A for this flight. I'd appreciate it if you would lower your voice and address him with the respect he deserves." Miguel's accent became slightly more pronounced with his controlled anger, the R in respect rolling longer than usual. A murmur rippled through first class at the mention of Nexus Quantum. Even Barnes seemed to falter momentarily as recognition dawned. Nexus Quantum, the tech giant whose innovative security protocols had revolutionized digital banking. The company worth over $70 billion. The black success story featured on the cover of Forbes just last month. But Barnes rallied quickly, his moment of uncertainty replaced by defensive anger. "I don't care if his daddy owns the whole damn airline. That's my seat. I've sat in 2A on this flight for 15 years. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants prepare for departure." The metallic echo made the tension in the cabin seem even more pronounced. Sophia looked desperately between Barnes, Noah, and Miguel. Beads of sweat had formed on her forehead despite the cool cabin air. "Gentlemen, we need to resolve this immediately. Mr. Barnes, please take seat 2C for now, and we can sort this out properly once we're airborne." "I will not be moved for this." Barnes stopped himself, but the unspoken slur hung in the air like a noxious cloud. Noah, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the suddenly silent cabin. "Mr. Barnes, I apologize for the inconvenience. If it's important to you, I'm happy to move to another seat." The offer coming from this poised child after Barnes's behavior cast the man in an even worse light. Several passengers made sounds of disapproval directed at Barnes. A woman in the third row actually hissed. Miguel placed a protective hand on Noah's shoulder, his calloused palm warm and reassuring through the fabric of the boy's blazer. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Montgomery. Your father purchased this seat specifically." To Sophia, he said, "Please check the system again. I believe you'll find Mr. Montgomery's reservation was made weeks ago." Sophia nodded and stepped away to consult her tablet, the clicking of her nails against the screen audible in the tense silence. Barnes, sensing the cabin's mood turning against him, doubled down, his face flushing darker. "This is ridiculous. I'm a Diamond Elite member with over 3 million miles. This kid probably doesn't even have a frequent flyer number." Dr. Preston sighed audibly, the sound cutting through the tension. "Oh, for heaven's sake. The child has offered to move. Why don't you show some grace and accept seat 2C? They're identical seats." It's the principal. Barnes insisted, his voice rising again, causing a baby in the next cabin to start crying. I always sit in 2A. Always. It's in my customer profile. This is about the airline honoring its commitments to its best customers. Sophia returned her expression, troubled blonde wisps escaping from her tight bun. Mr. Barnes. Mr. Montgomery's reservation for seat 2A was indeed made 3 weeks ago. Your reservation shows seat 2C. There appears to have been a change in your seat assignment when you checked in via the app this morning. Barnes' face darkened to a dangerous shade of red, a vein pulsing visibly at his temple. That's impossible. Check again. I never touched the seat assignment. Sophia's voice remained professional, but tension lined her face. I've checked twice, sir. There appears to have been a change in your seat assignment during check-in. I didn't change anything. I never touched the seat assignment. Barnes' gaze fell on Noah again, and something ugly flashed in his eyes. I see what's happening here. Special treatment. Is that it? Bumping loyal customers for diversity points? Miguel stepped forward, positioning himself partially between Barnes and Noah. His stance shifted subtly into what Noah recognized from his father's security briefings as a defensive posture. Mr. Barnes, I suggest you reconsider your tone and implications. From the back of first class, another passenger called out, Just take the other seat, man. You're holding up the flight. The sentiment was echoed by murmurs of agreement throughout the cabin. But Barnes was beyond reason now. His face contorted with indignation and something darker, something that made Noah's stomach clench with an instinctive fear he couldn't quite name. No, this is my seat. I always sit here. I won't be displaced by some affirmative action. That's enough. The words, though not shouted, cut through the cabin like a physical force. The captain appeared in the cabin doorway, alerted by the escalating situation. Captain James Harrison, a 30-year veteran with silver at his temples and the ramrod posture of a former military pilot, surveyed the scene with practiced calm. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to commanding airspace. Sophia quickly explained the situation, her words tumbling out in a rush. Captain Harrison listened, then turned to Barnes, his expression neutral, but his eyes assessing. Sir, I understand you're upset, but we have 2 passengers assigned to the same seat due to a system error. We're offering you an identical seat just across the aisle. I need you to accept this solution so we can depart. Barnes drew himself up, his expensive suit straining slightly across his shoulders. Do you know who I am? I'm William Barnes, Executive VP at Mercer Financial. I spend over $200,000 a year with this airline. Captain Harrison remained unimpressed, his weathered face betraying no emotion. And we appreciate your business, Mr. Barnes. Now, please, take seat 2C so we can depart. I will not. This is outrageous. I want to speak to your superior. Barnes was shouting now, spittle flying from his lips. A vein pulsed visibly at his temple, and his complexion had taken on an alarming purplish hue. The captain's expression hardened, his jaw setting in a firm line. Mr. Barnes, I am the superior on this aircraft. You are now delaying the departure of this flight. I'm giving you one final opportunity to take the offered seat. Otherwise, I'll have no choice but to have you removed from this aircraft. A hush fell over the cabin. The only sounds were the distant hum of the engines and the soft whirring of air circulation. Barnes looked around, perhaps finally realizing how he appeared to everyone watching a grown man having a tantrum over a seat berating a child. For a moment, it seemed he might relent. Then his gaze fell on Noah again, composed, dignified, despite his age, and something seemed to snap. His face contorted with a rage that seemed to transcend the immediate situation. This is reverse discrimination, Barnes declared loudly, his voice echoing off the cabin walls. This is what's wrong with America today. I work my whole life, pay my taxes, fly this airline loyally for decades, and get bumped for this. He gestured at Noah with naked contempt, his hand shaking with anger. For what? Because his daddy played the race card. Because the airline wants diversity photos for their annual report. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Even those who might have had some sympathy for Barnes's seat predicament were shocked by his outburst. Noah sat perfectly still, but Miguel could see the slight tremor in the boy's lower lip, the way his small hands gripped the compass in his pocket so tightly that his knuckles whitened. Captain Harrison's face darkened, the professional mask slipping for just a moment to reveal genuine disgust. That's it. He turned to the lead flight attendant. Call ground control. Tell them we're returning to the gate and we'll need security to remove a disruptive passenger. As the announcement was made that the aircraft would be returning to the gate, a collective groan rose from the cabin. Barnes seemed to suddenly realize the consequences of his actions, his face shifting from righteous indignation to dawning horror. "Wait! No, you can't do this!" he protested, his voice losing some of its bluster. Sweat beaded visibly on his forehead, and his expensive tie hung askew. "I have a meeting in London tomorrow. This is discrimination against me." But it was too late. The jetway, which had just been detached, was being reconnected to the aircraft. Through the window, Noah could see ground crew scurrying into position, their fluorescent vests bright against the tarmac. The distant sound of airport machinery grew louder as they approached the gate. Through it all, Noah sat perfectly still, his expression carefully controlled, despite the tears threatening at the corners of his eyes. His chest felt tight, his breathing shallow, but he focused on remaining composed, just as his father had taught him. The compass in his pocket dug into his palm. Where he gripped it, the familiar contours grounding him amid the chaos. Miguel leaned down to the boy's level, his voice low and reassuring. "You've conducted yourself with perfect dignity, Mr. Montgomery. Your father would be proud." The security chief's eyes, usually alert and scanning for threats, were filled with a mixture of concern and admiration. This close, Noah could see the faint scar on Miguel's jawline more clearly, a reminder of the man's commitment to protection to duty. "Is he always like this when you travel?" Miguel asked quietly, his head angled to block Barnes from view. Noah shook his head. "This is my first commercial flight alone." Miguel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Then you're handling it remarkably well, Dirk." Preston caught Noah's eye from across the aisle and gave him a small nod of approval. Her silver hair gleamed under the cabin lights, her posture still perfectly erect despite the tension surrounding them. "Young man," she said softly, "you remind me of my grandson. He's about your age. Just as composed, though I doubt he'd handle this situation with your grace." Noah managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, ma'am." Meanwhile, Barnes continued to protest as the captain returned to the cockpit to coordinate with ground control. His voice had taken on a desperate edge, his previously commanding presence diminished by the realization that he had overplayed his hand. "This is outrageous. I'm a loyal customer. That seat is mine." Sophia approached Noah, a slight tremor in her hands betraying her distress. "I'm so sorry about this, Mr. Montgomery. Can I get you anything while we wait?" The faint scent of her perfume, something floral and light, momentarily displaced the tension in the air. Noah shook his head. "No, thank you. I'm fine." His voice remained steady, betraying none of the turmoil within. The cool leather of the seat beneath him had warmed to his body temperature, somehow making the whole situation feel more real, more immediate. What no one on the plane yet realized was that one of the passengers who recorded the entire incident had already uploaded the video tagging Nexus Quantum and major news outlets. By the time airport security boarded to remove Barnes, the clip was beginning to circulate on social media. By the time the flight finally departed, minus Barnes, but with Noah still in seat 2A, the video would have over 100,000 views. The distant sound of the jetway reconnecting to the aircraft punctuated the tense silence. Then came the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching through the tunnel. Barnes' protests grew increasingly desperate as two airport security officers entered the cabin, their uniforms crisp, their expressions professionally neutral. "Sir," one of the officers said firmly, "we need you to gather your belongings and come with us." "Do you know who I am?" Barnes demanded, his face now an alarming shade of purple. Spittle gathered at the corners of his mouth and his hands trembled visibly as he clutched his briefcase. "Yes, sir. You're the passenger who's being removed from this aircraft for disruptive behavior. Now please collect your things." A tense silence fell over the cabin as Barnes realized he had no choice. The only sounds were the soft hum of the ventilation system and the muffled announcements from the terminal beyond the open door. He snatched his briefcase from the overhead bin, the expensive leather catching momentarily on the latch and causing him to jerk it free with a grunt of frustration. Before turning to leave, he shot a venomous glare at Noah, his eyes narrowed to slits. "You'll regret this," he muttered, his voice low but carrying in the silent cabin. "Your father isn't the only one with connections." Miguel stepped forward immediately, his body language shifting subtly from protective to threatening. The movement was minimal, just a slight adjustment of posture, a minimal tilting forward, but the effect was unmistakable. "Mr. Barnes," he said, his voice low, but caring, "I'd advise against making anything that could be construed as a threat toward the Montgomery family. That would be unwise." Something in Miguel's tone, or perhaps in the way his jacket shifted to reveal the slight bulge of his shoulder holster, made Barnes take a step back. The air between the two men seemed to crackle with tension. With a final huff of indignation, Barnes allowed the security officers to escort him off the plane. The sound of his expensive shoes striking the jetway floor receded, gradually punctuated by his continued protests. As he disappeared down the jetway, a palpable sense of relief spread through the cabin. Several passengers actually applauded the sound, quickly swelling into a brief but enthusiastic ovation. Noah felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment at being the center of attention. Dr. Preston leaned across the aisle toward Noah, her pearl necklace catching the light as she moved. "Young man, you handled that situation with remarkable poise. May I ask how old you are?" "9, ma'am," Noah replied, his voice steadier now that the immediate threat had passed. "9," she repeated, shaking her head in admiration. "Well, I'm 75, and I don't think I could have remained as composed as you just did in the face of such aggression." Noah offered a small smile. "My father says dignity is the best response to indignity. Your father sounds like a wise man, Doctor," Preston replied, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I hope to meet him someday. He was supposed to be on this flight." Noah explained, his fingers finally relaxing their death grip on his mother's compass. "But there was an emergency at our research facility in Connecticut." Captain Harrison returned to the cabin briefly, his tall frame dominating the narrow aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing momentarily. Our estimated arrival time in London is now 7:30 a.m. local time." He paused by Noah's seat, his expression softening slightly as he addressed the boy. "Mr. Montgomery, on behalf of the airline, I want to apologize for what happened. That's not how we treat our passengers, regardless of age." "Thank you," Captain Noah replied with a formality that seemed both endearing and slightly heartbreaking in one so young. As the plane finally pushed back from the gate, Noah gazed out the window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac ground crew figures, moving with renewed purpose, now that the delay had been resolved. He looked tired suddenly, the composed mask slipping just a fraction, to reveal the child beneath a child who had been forced to shoulder adult burdens and navigate adult prejudices. Miguel, seated directly behind him, noticed but said nothing. His job was to protect the boy physically, Emotional protection was beyond his purview. Still, he made a mental note to speak with Julian about how well Noah had handled the situation. The boy deserved recognition for his composure under fire. In Connecticut, Julian Montgomery was about to receive news that would change everything. The Bellevue Research Center. A sprawling complex of glass and steel, nestled among the autumn-painted Connecticut woods, hummed with the controlled panic of a crisis contained. In a conference room overlooking the manicured grounds, Julian Montgomery sat at the head of a long table, his presence commanding, despite the exhaustion evident in the set of his shoulders. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating patterns that reminded Julian fleetingly of quantum probability distributions. Outside, the trees bent in the wind, their brilliant red and gold leaves tearing free and swirling in miniature tornadoes across the lawn. "So, you're telling me," he said, his voice deceptively quiet, "that 3 months of quantum encryption research is just gone." The words hung in the air, seeming to drop the temperature in the room by several degrees. Julian's fingers tapped a precise rhythm on the polished mahogany, the sound unnervingly similar to a countdown. Dr. Alicia Lawson, head of R&D, pushed her glasses up her nose nervously. The gesture left a smudge on the lens, which she didn't seem to notice. "Not gone, Mr. Montgomery. Compromised. We believe the breach was sophisticated but limited. We've contained it, but until we verify the extent. You told me this facility was unhackable." Julian's words were precise, measured, cutting through her explanation like a scalpel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room's temperature seemed to drop several degrees, executives and scientists shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Nothing is truly unhackable, sir." Dr. Lawson responded, her courage admirable in the face of Julian's displeasure. A slight tremor in her hands betrayed her nervousness, but her voice remained steady. "That's why we have protocols for containment and recovery. We're already tracing the breach. We'll have answers within hours." Julian's phone vibrated against the polished conference table, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He glanced at it dismissively, then did a double-take at the name on the screen. "Miguel Rodriguez. His son's security chief should be on a plane to London by now." Something was wrong. "Excuse me," he said, rising abruptly. The assembled executives and scientists remained frozen in their seats as he strode from the room, bringing the phone to his ear. The door closed behind him, with a soft click that somehow seemed more final than a slam. "Rodriguez report." Julian's voice was clipped professional, betraying none of the sudden fear that had gripped his chest. The security chief's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Sir, there's been an incident on the plane involving Noah." Julian's world narrowed to a pinpoint focus, his surroundings fading to insignificance. The ornate hallway, the distant sound of rain against windows, the murmur of scientists in nearby labs, all disappeared as his entire being concentrated on Miguel's next words. "Is he hurt?" Julian's knuckles whitened around the phone, his heart pounding against his ribs with such force he was certain it would leave bruises. "No, sir, but there was a confrontation. A passenger, a white male, mid-50s, disputed Noah's seat assignment. It got ugly. Define ugly." Julian's voice had gone winter cold, each syllable precise and dangerous. He moved to the window, staring out at the storm without seeing it, his reflection in the glass showing a face transformed by barely contained rage. Rodriguez hesitated just long enough for Julian to know it was bad. "Racial slurs, sir. In front of the entire first-class cabin." The captain had the man removed, but what Julian's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles paled, the case creaking under the pressure. "It's been filmed, sir. It's already online. Nexus Quantum is tagged." A sledgehammer of fury and fear slammed into Julian's chest. His 9-year-old son shouldn't have to be composed in the face of racism. He should be playing laughing secure in the knowledge that his father would protect him from the world's ugliness. Yet, here they were. Julian closed his eyes briefly, forcing himself to take a deep breath. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, but the undercurrent of rage was unmistakable. How did Noah handle it? With perfect composure, Sir Rodriguez replied, a note of pride entering his voice. Better than most adults would have. He remained calm, polite, dignified throughout. Several passengers commented on his maturity. Pride warred with anguish in Julian's heart. Yes, his son had behaved exactly as he had taught him, with dignity, with composure, with the poise expected of a Montgomery. But at what cost? What 9-year-old should have to draw on such reserves of self-control while being publicly humiliated? The plane is delayed, but will be departing shortly. Rodriguez continued. I'm staying with Noah all the way to London. I've already alerted Foster to meet us with additional security at Heathrow. No, Julian said, decision crystallizing with diamond clarity. Cancel London. Both of you return to the penthouse as soon as you can deplane. Sir, the Thornfield acquisition can wait. My son can't. Julian's mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating, planning, analyzing the problem from multiple angles simultaneously. Who is this man? The one who confronted Noah. Rodriguez's voice took on a note of grim satisfaction. William Barnes, Executive VP at Mercer Financial. We have his full details. Good. Put our people on it. I want to know everything about him by the time I get back to the city. Julian checked his watch, the movement precise and controlled, like everything else about him. And Rodriguez ensured Noah doesn't see any news or social media. I'll explain everything when I see him. Understood, sir. Julian ended the call and stood motionless for a moment, struggling to contain the storm of emotions, threatening to overwhelm his carefully maintained control. The reflection in the window showed a man he barely recognized, face taut with rage, eyes burning with a fury he hadn't felt since Olivia. 2 years ago, when she was killed in the car accident that he survived, he made a promise to her memory. He would protect their son from everything that might harm him. Today he failed. His phone buzzed again. Jacob Phillips, the board chairman. The video was spreading. Julian took a deep breath, centering himself. Emotions were useful only when channeled productively. Rage without direction was merely weakness. He would use this fury focus, direct it with surgical precision. He walked back into the conference room, his decision already made. The assembled team fell silent, immediately sensing the shift in his demeanor. The situation has changed, he announced to the waiting team. His voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent that made several executives straighten involuntarily in their seats. Dr. Lawson, you have 24 hours to complete your investigation and recovery. Report directly to me with updates every 2 hours. Everyone else, we're done here. As the room emptied, Julian called for his helicopter. The quantum encryption crisis would have to wait. His son needed him. And William Barnes was about to learn the cost of crossing Julian Montgomery. By the time Julian's helicopter touched down on the rooftop landing pad of his Manhattan building, the video of the confrontation had been viewed over 2 million times. Seat stolen and #NextGeneration were trending nationally. Cable news networks had picked up the story, running the footage on a loop punctuated by panel discussions about race in America, corporate responsibility, and the rights of children. Rain pelted the windshield as they descended. The city lights blurred into watercolor streaks through the downpour. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the Manhattan skyline in stark white flashes that mirrored Julian's fractured thoughts. In the penthouse, Noah sat quietly on the same leather sofa, where just that morning he had been preparing for his first international business meeting. His tablet was nowhere to be seen. Rodriguez, having gently but firmly confiscated all electronics upon their return, stood at attention near the elevator. "Sir," he acknowledged, as Julian strode in, water still beading on his coat. "Noah has been home for approximately 40 minutes. He's had water but declined food. He hasn't asked any questions." That last detail worried Julian more than anything else. His son, always curious, always questioning, had gone silent. He nodded dismissal to Rodriguez, who stepped into the elevator with a final concerned glance at the boy. Julian removed his suit jacket, draping it over a chair. He loosened his tie, but didn't remove it. Some habits of formality were too ingrained to break even in crisis. Water dripped from his hair onto the carpet, but for once, he didn't care about the imperfection. "Noah," he said softly, moving to sit beside his son. "I'm here now." The boy turned to look at him, and Julian was struck by how much older his son's eyes seemed since this morning. The rain continued to lash against the windows, creating shadows that danced across Noah's face, highlighting the fatigue etched there. "You canceled the London meeting," Noah observed. Not a question. His small fingers worried at the edge of his sleeve, the only visible sign of his distress. Some things are more important than business. Julian reached out, hesitated, then placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The fabric of Noah's blazer was still slightly damp from the rain, the warmth of his small body radiating through it. "Rodriguez told me what happened, that you conducted yourself with dignity. I remembered what you taught me." Noah said, his voice small but steady. "Never let them see you rattled." The pride Julian felt was matched only by his sorrow. "I'm sorry, son. I should have been there." Noah looked surprised, his eyes widening slightly. "It wasn't your fault, Daddy. It's my job to protect you. I failed." Julian's voice caught almost imperceptibly on the last word, betraying the depth of his emotion. "You can't protect me from everything," Noah said, with a wisdom that broke Julian's heart. His small hand moved to the pocket, where Julian knew he kept Olivia's compass. "Mom used to say that." The mention of Olivia caught Julian off guard. The wound of her absence, usually a dull, persistent ache, suddenly flared sharp and fresh. "She did, didn't she?" A bittersweet smile touched his lips. "Your mother was very wise." Thunder rolled outside, a deep rumble that vibrated through the building. The storm had followed Julian from Connecticut, as if mirroring his inner turmoil. The man was angry. Noah continued, as if needing to process the events aloud. His gaze fixed on the rain streaming down the windows. He kept saying the seat was his, that I didn't belong there. Julian's jaw tightened, muscles clenching visibly along his jawline. He was wrong. "Because of our skin color?" Noah asked bluntly. Is that why he was so mad? Julian felt the familiar tightrope walk of explaining racism to his son, without letting it define his worldview. Olivia had been better at this, finding the balance between awareness and optimism. He could almost hear her voice now guiding him. Some people, he began carefully, can't see past what we look like to who we are. That man looked at you and saw only a black child, not Noah Montgomery, brilliant, poised, and every bit as entitled to that seat as anyone else. His anger says everything about his limitations and nothing about your worth. Noah absorbed this, turning it over in his mind. His fingers moved to his mother's compass, drawing it from his pocket and running his thumb over its worn silver surface. I offered to move, he admitted, shame coloring his voice. Was that wrong? Should I have stood my ground more firmly? No, Julian said firmly, tightening his grip on his son's shoulder. You showed grace under pressure. Dignity isn't about never yielding. It's about choosing when to yield from a position of strength, not weakness. He squeezed his son's shoulder. I'm proud of you. Noah leaned into his father's side, the first sign of vulnerability he'd shown. The warmth of his small body against Julian's side released something tight in Julian's chest. "Rodriguez took my tablet," he said after a moment. "He wouldn't let me see the news." "Is it bad?" Julian considered lying, then decided against it. His son deserved the truth delivered with care but without evasion. The incident was filmed. It's being shared widely online and on television. People are watching me get yelled at. Horror crept into Noah's voice, his body tensing against Julian's side. "They're watching you remain composed while a grown man loses control," Julian corrected gently, his arm moving around Noah's shoulders. "They're seeing your strength, son." Noah was silent for a long moment, the only sound the rain against the windows and the occasional rumble of thunder. Lightning flashed, illuminating father and son in stark white light for a moment, before returning them to the softer glow of the penthouse lamps. "What happens now?" Noah asked finally, looking up at his father with complete trust. It was the question Julian had been considering since Rodriguez's call. What happens now? The obvious corporate response would be to issue a statement, perhaps file a complaint against the airline, and move on. Protect the brand, minimize the disruption return, focus to the Thornfield acquisition. But this wasn't about Nexus Quantum. This was about his son. "Now," Julian said, "decision made. We show the world who the Montgomery men are." Noah looked up at him questioningly, his brown eyes so like Olivia's, wide and trusting. Julian met his son's gaze with steely resolve, the storm outside matching the intensity building within him. "William Barnes thought he could intimidate you because you're young and black. He's about to learn that was the worst mistake of his life." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, lightning split the sky again, illuminating father and son in a moment of perfect understanding. The city gleamed like a circuit board of possibilities, a circuit board that Julian Montgomery was about to rewire in ways no one could anticipate. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the sky a brilliant, washed-clean blue. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the Montgomery penthouse, creating pools of golden light on the polished floors. Julian sat in his home office reviewing reports on the fallout. The tactile sensation of the leather chair beneath him, the faint scent of the lemon polish Isabella used on his desk, the distant sounds of the city far below, all grounded him in the physical world, while his mind processed multiple streams of information. William Barnes' career at Mercer Financial was hanging by a thread. The airline had issued a formal apology to Noah and announced a review of their customer service policies. Social media remained ablaze with discussions about privilege race and how children should be treated in public spaces. At Dignity, his armor was trending, a phrase pulled directly from Julian's parenting philosophy. All of this was proceeding according to Julian's meticulously crafted response plan, set in motion with a series of carefully placed phone calls throughout the night. What wasn't part of the plan was the text message that had just appeared on his phone from a name he hadn't seen in nearly 2 years, Judge Victoria Harlow. "Turn on Channel 4 News immediately." Frowning, Julian reached for the remote, switching on the television mounted on his office wall. The sound system hummed to life, filling the room with the measured tones of a morning news anchor. The screen filled with a familiar face, Dr. Eleanor Preston, the silver-haired woman who had been sitting across from Noah on the plane. The caption identified her as a retired pediatrician and child development expert. "What we witnessed on that flight," Dr. Preston was saying, her pearl necklace catching the studio lights, "was a microcosm of the different America that black children must navigate compared to their white peers." Different America. The interviewer prompted, leaning forward slightly in her chair. "Yes, black children are often forced to develop a kind of armor, a composure beyond their years, because society doesn't allow them the luxury of childish outbursts or normal developmental behaviors." Dr. Preston's hands moved expressively as she spoke, her gold rings catching the light. Noah Montgomery sat in that seat with the weight of that knowledge on his small shoulders. Julian's throat tightened at the accuracy of her observation. It was something he and Olivia had discussed many times, how their son would have to be twice as composed, twice as prepared, twice as everything just to be given the same opportunities as his white peers. As a pediatrician who practiced for over 40 years, Dr. Preston continued, I can tell you that children internalize these moments of public humiliation deeply. They seek to understand why they were targeted, often concluding there must be something wrong with them. For children of color, these incidents compound over time, creating psychological wounds that we as a society must address. Julian found himself nodding in agreement, reminded of his own childhood experiences, the subtle slights and not-so-subtle aggressions that had shaped his worldview. The difference was that he had grown up in relative poverty, without the buffer of wealth and privilege that Noah enjoyed. Yet here was his son facing the same fundamental prejudices, despite all the advantages Julian had worked to provide. The interview continued with Dr. Preston speaking eloquently about the responsibility of bystanders to intervene the airline's handling of the situation and the broader implications for how America discusses race with children. At no point did she mention Julian or Nexus Quantum, specifically focusing instead on Noah as a child, not an heir to a corporate empire. Julian's phone rang his PR director. I'm watching it, he said, by way of greeting, the leather of his chair creaking slightly as he leaned back. This is gold. The director responded, his voice tinged with professional excitement. We couldn't have scripted a better third-party endorsement. She's credible, articulate, and has both the professional credentials and eyewitness perspective to command attention. We had nothing to do with this interview, Julian pointed out, running his thumb over the edge of his wedding band, a habit he'd developed after Olivia's death, which makes it even more powerful. Should we reach out to her? Bring her into our response strategy? Julian considered this, watching Dr. Preston field another question with composed eloquence. No, let her speak independently. It's more authentic that way. As he ended the call, a notification appeared on his tablet, a background report on Eleanor Preston that his security team had compiled in the few minutes since she'd appeared on television. Pediatrician widow of federal judge Robert Preston, board member of the Children's Defense Fund, mother of 3, grandmother of 7, impeccable credentials and reputation. Another text from Judge Harlow arrived. Eleanor Preston is an old friend. She's requested to meet Noah. Thoughts? Julian stared at the message, an idea taking shape in his mind. The corporate approach to the Barnes incident had been executed flawlessly. The man was losing his job, his reputation, and soon, once the discrimination lawsuit that Julian's team was quietly orchestrating from behind the scenes was filed, likely much of his personal wealth. But was that enough? Was corporate retribution what Noah needed to heal from this experience? Or did his son need something more meaningful, something that addressed the human element, rather than just the power dynamics? He texted Judge Harlow back. Arrange it, but I have conditions. Julian's phone rang almost immediately. Victoria. He answered, his voice neutral, despite the sudden quickening of his pulse. Julian Judge Harlow's crisp tones came through the speaker, bringing with them memories of dinner parties, legal discussions, and Olivia's laughter. It's been a long time. 2 years, 1 month, and 14 days, he replied, the precision, both a shield and a confession. Since Olivia's funeral. There was a pause filled with unspoken grief and missed connections. The scent of jasmine seemed to fill the room momentarily, Olivia's favorite perfume, though Julian knew it was just a trick of memory. I've missed Noah, Victoria said finally, her voice softening. And you. Julian closed his eyes briefly, his fingers automatically reaching for the wedding band he still wore. Victoria Harlow had been more than Olivia's godmother. She'd been her mentor confidant and second mother after Olivia's parents died. The judge's holiday dinners had been a tradition, her Georgetown brownstone a second home. After the accident, Julian had cut ties with almost everyone from Olivia's life, including Victoria. The pain of seeing them, of being reminded of what he'd lost, had been too acute. Noah asked about you. He admitted the confession costing him something. After the funeral, I didn't know what to say. You could have said I loved his mother like a daughter, Victoria suggested gently. That I held him as a baby. That I would be there for him if he needed me. The words stung with their simple truth. Julian felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him. It was easier to cut ties, to focus only on moving forward. Grief isn't linear, Julian. Neither is healing. Victoria's voice carried the wisdom of her years and her profession. And children need more than one source of love and guidance. The truth of her words resonated with something that had been growing in Julian's mind since seeing Noah's face upon returning home. A realization that his son needed more than just his father's protection and ambition. He needed connection, perspective, the kind of wisdom Olivia would have provided. From the hallway came the sound of Noah's voice asking Isabella a question about breakfast. The normalcy of it, the childlike tone, so different from the composed mask Noah had worn last night, tugged at Julian's heart. "Come for breakfast tomorrow," he said suddenly, the decision made in an instant. 8 o'clock. Noah would like to see you. The silence on the other end spoke to Victoria's surprise at this sudden opening of a door long closed. "I'll be there," she said finally, emotion making her usually crisp voice slightly husky. "And Julian, what you're planning for Barnes. Remember that Noah will be watching how you handle this. Justice and vengeance cast different shadows." After they hung up, Julian sat motionless, staring at the city skyline without really seeing it. For the first time since Olivia's death, he'd invited a piece of her world back into their lives. It felt both terrifying and right, like stepping out onto a high wire without a net, but knowing it was the only way forward. His phone pinged with a text from the head of security. "Full Barnes dossier ready. Financial vulnerabilities identified. Awaiting your instruction." Julian glanced toward Noah's room, thinking of Victoria's parting words. Justice and vengeance cast different shadows. Which would his son see him choose? He began to type his response. His path forward, clarifying with each keystroke. The morning sunlight shifted, creating new patterns on his desk. A reminder that even the most familiar landscapes change with time and perspective. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, the October sun glinting off the glass towers of Manhattan's financial district. At Mercer Financial's headquarters, William Barnes arrived at his usual time of 7:30 a.m., nodding curtly to security guards and junior employees who scurried out of his path. If he noticed the whispers that followed in his wake, the sidelong glances he gave no indication. His mind was occupied with damage control for the ridiculous airline incident, as he'd been referring to it in the calls he'd made throughout the weekend, to salvage his business relationships. He straightened his tie as he walked the silk sliding smoothly beneath his fingers. The familiar weight of his Rolex on his wrist, the scent of his expensive cologne, the deference of staff as he passed all served to reinforce his sense of position and authority. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent, his fellow passengers studying their phones with unusual intensity. One young analyst actually stepped out when Barnes entered, mumbling an excuse about a forgotten document. Barnes checked his own device, frowning at the lack of messages from the CEO or board members. Typically, after a missed international meeting of this importance, he'd have received at least a few inquiries. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the hushed opulence of the executive floor. Thick carpeting that muffled footsteps, tasteful artwork on the walls, the distant murmur of conversations behind closed doors. The scent of fresh flowers from the reception area mingled with the clean, antiseptic smell common to corporate environments. His executive assistant wasn't at her desk when he arrived. Another irregularity that sent a small frisson of unease down his spine. Barnes shrugged it off, swiping his keycard to enter his corner office. The familiar beep and click of the lock disengaging provided momentary reassurance. He was halfway to his desk when he realized someone was already sitting in his chair. "What the hell?" he blurted, stopping short. His briefcase suddenly felt too heavy in his hand. CEO Rebecca Chambers swiveled to face him, her expression glacial. Beside her stood Thomas Reed, head of legal, his tall frame rigid with tension. And on the sofa sat Diane Matthews from HR, her tablet clutched in white-knuckled hands. None of them rose to greet him. The smell of Rebecca's signature perfume, something expensive and French, hung in the air, mingling with the scent of fresh coffee that no one had offered to Barnes. "Richard," Rebecca said, her voice as cold as her expression. "Close the door." Barnes felt the first stirrings of genuine alarm, a fluttering sensation in his stomach that he hadn't experienced since being called to the principal's office as a child. "What's going on? Why are you in my office?" "I think you know why we're here," Rebecca replied. She turned the monitor on his desk so he could see it. On the screen was a still image from the viral video. Barnes looming over Noah, his face contorted with anger. The caption below read, "Mercer Financial VP in racist tirade against 9-year-old son of tech billionaire." Barnes's face drained of color, the blood rushing from his head so quickly that he felt momentarily dizzy. "That's taken completely out of context. The airline screwed up my seat assignment. We've seen the entire video," Richard Thomas said, his lawyer's voice precise and damning. "All 6 minutes and 47 seconds of it. There is no context that justifies what you said to that child." Thomas's finger tapped against a legal pad, where he'd apparently transcribed Barnes's exact words. The yellow paper seemed to glow accusingly in the morning light, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Do you have any idea who that child is?" Rebecca continued, rising from the chair. At 5'4", she still somehow managed to look down on Barnes's 6'1" frame. That was Noah Montgomery, son of Julian Montgomery, CEO of Nexus Quantum. Barnes waved a dismissive hand, trying to recapture his usual authority. "So he's some tech guy's kid. What does that have to do with Mercer?" Diane from HR made a sound between a gasp and a laugh, the leather of the sofa creaking as she shifted position. "Richard, Nexus Quantum is not just some tech company. They're the leading quantum security firm in the world. They protect the digital assets of over 30% of the global banking industry, including," Rebecca added with deadly precision, 4 of Mercer Financial's largest clients. "Clients who have been calling me nonstop since Saturday morning, demanding to know why one of our executives was filmed racially abusing the son of their security provider." Barnes's swagger began to crumble, beads of sweat forming at his hairline, despite the perfectly regulated temperature of the office. "It wasn't about race," he protested, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "It was about my seat. I always sit in 2A. I've had that seat for 15 years. You called a black child an affirmative action charity case," Thomas said, consulting a document on his tablet. The blue light reflected off his wire-rimmed glasses as he read. "You implied his father couldn't be successful without playing the race card. You used the phrase, reverse discrimination." He looked up, eyes cold. "Would you like me to continue?" Barnes sank into one of the visitor chairs across from his own desk, the irony of his position not lost on him. The leather creaked beneath his weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "Look, I lost my temper. I'd had a couple of drinks in the lounge. I was stressed about the London meeting. I apologize if my words were misconstrued." Misconstrued? Rebecca's voice could freeze fire. Over 5 million people have viewed that video, Richard. There's no misconstruing what happened. 5 million. Barnes whispered, the magnitude finally hitting him. His collar suddenly felt too tight, constricting his breathing. And counting. Diane confirmed her tablet, displaying a real-time analytics dashboard. The number ticked upward even as they watched. It's been picked up by every major news outlet. Your name, face, and Mercer Financial are all prominently featured. Our social media team has been working around the clock since Saturday. Barnes's mind raced, calculating angles, looking for an out. So we issue an apology. Corporate PR 101. Mercer Financial regrets the actions of one employee who doesn't reflect our values. Problem solved. Thomas shook his head, his expression suggesting Barnes was being naively optimistic. If only it were that simple. We've received a letter. He removed a document from his portfolio and slid it across the desk. The heavy cream paper bore the embossed logo of Nexus Quantum. From Nexus Quantum's legal team. Barnes stared at the letter without touching it, as if it might burn his fingers. What does it say? It states that unless Mercer Financial takes swift, decisive, and public action regarding your conduct, Nexus Quantum will be forced to reconsider its security arrangements with any financial institution that maintains ties to Mercer. The blood drained from Barnes' face as the implications sank in. His heart hammered against his ribs, the sound pulsing in his ears. That's blackmail. That's leverage, Rebecca corrected coldly. Perfectly legal leverage. Nexus Quantum has no obligation to do business with anyone associated with a man who publicly abused the CEO's child. Rebecca moved to the window, silhouetted against the morning sun. Her shadow stretched across the carpet, reaching toward Barnes like an accusing finger. So what? You're firing me over a seat dispute. Barnes's voice rose incredulously, cracking slightly on the last word. I've generated over $3 billion in revenue for this company in the past decade, and you may have just cost us twice that amount in lost business and reputational damage, Rebecca countered, turning back to face him. The sunlight behind her created a halo effect that seemed ironically appropriate. But no, we're not firing you. Not exactly. Thomas slid another document across the desk. The Mercer Financial letterhead seemed to mock Barnes, a symbol of the career he had built, and was now watching crumble. This is the board's proposal. A voluntary resignation effective immediately, 6-month severance, health benefits through the end of the year, and a mutual non-disparagement agreement. Barnes stared at the document in disbelief, the words swimming before his eyes. This is insane. You can't be serious. We're very serious, Rebecca said. And quite frankly, you're getting off lightly. Julian Montgomery could crush you. Crush all of us without breaking a sweat if he chose to. The board meets in 1 hour. Diane added, checking her watch. The diamond-studded face caught the light, momentarily blinding Barnes. We need your decision before then. Barnes's shock began to curdle into anger, his face flushing as he regained some of his composure. So that's it. 30 years at this company, and you're throwing me to the wolves over one mistake because some tech billionaire throws his weight around. Rebecca leaned forward, placing both hands on the desk. Her manicured nails clicked against the polished surface, the sound sharp and final. No, Richard. We're cutting you loose because you revealed something ugly about yourself on camera, and now the whole world knows it. You're toxic, and Mercer Financial can't afford the contamination. She straightened, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her immaculate suit. 1 hour. Sign the papers, clean out your personal items, and be gone before the board meeting starts. That's the deal. They left him alone in his office for less than 1 more hour, with the resignation papers and the Nexus Quantum letter. Barnes stared at the documents, rage and disbelief warring within him. The familiar surroundings, the view of Manhattan he'd coveted for years, the awards on the walls, The photographs of him with political figures and celebrities suddenly seemed like artifacts from someone else's life. How had his life imploded so completely in just 48 hours? He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a contact labeled Gerald Winston Kirby and Associates, and pressed call. His hands trembled slightly, the screen smudging beneath his sweaty fingertips. If Mercer thought they could discard him this easily, they had another thing coming. And as for Julian Montgomery, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. What Barnes didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that his call to the prominent employment law firm was being monitored in real time. In a secure operations room at Nexus Quantum headquarters, a team of security specialists tracked his digital footprint, anticipating his every move. The room hummed with the sound of advanced computers' displays, showing Barnes' phone activity email account, even the security camera feed from his Mercer office. And in his office, 40 floors above them, Julian Montgomery received a notification that Phase 1 of what he privately called Operation Consequence was proceeding exactly as planned. He smiled slightly as he closed the notification, the expression not reaching his eyes. The silver-framed dawn broke over Central Park, painting the Montgomery penthouse in soft golden light. In the kitchen, Isabella hummed a gentle tune as she prepared a breakfast spread, fit for visiting royalty: Belgian waffles, fresh berries, scrambled eggs with herbs, smoked salmon, and of course her famous buttermilk pancakes. The scent of vanilla and cinnamon filled the air, mingling with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Noah sat at the counter watching her work, his expression contemplative. He was dressed in casual clothes, designer jeans, and a simple polo shirt, a marked contrast to the formal attire he'd worn for his aborted London trip. His fingers traced patterns in the condensation on his orange juice glass, his legs swinging slightly, not quite reaching the floor. "You're making a lot of food," he observed, the clatter of pans and the sizzle of butter on the griddle, creating a comforting soundtrack to the morning. Isabella smiled enigmatically, flipping a pancake with practiced precision. "Your father said we're having a guest." This piqued Noah's interest, his posture straightening. He didn't say who. No, but he asked for the good china and had me polish the silver. She gave him a knowing look, her gold cross catching the light as she moved. Must be someone important. Noah considered this, his brow furrowing slightly. His father rarely entertained at home, preferring the strategic neutrality of restaurants or the power dynamic of his office. Whoever was coming must indeed be significant. "My mother's dishes," he asked quietly, referring to the hand-painted china that had been Olivia's pride, stored carefully in cabinets, rarely opened since her death. Isabella nodded, her expression softening. "The blue ones, with the gold trim." Noah's eyes widened slightly. Those dishes were special, used only for the most important occasions. His gaze moved to the formal dining table, already set with the precious china crystal glasses, catching the morning light and transforming it into miniature rainbows that danced across the white tablecloth. Julian entered, already dressed in a casual but immaculate weekend suit. His gaze fell on the breakfast preparations with approval. "Perfect, Isabella. Thank you." He turned to Noah, studying his son with an intensity that made the boy straighten instinctively. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," Noah answered automatically, then reconsidered, remembering his father's emphasis on honesty. "Actually, I had bad dreams." Julian's expression softened, concern replacing his usual composed mask. He moved closer, resting a hand on Noah's shoulder. "About the plane." Noah nodded, the weight of his father's hand, both comforting and grounding. The man kept yelling. "But in my dream, you weren't coming." No one was coming. Everyone just watched. The raw vulnerability in his son's admission struck Julian like a physical blow. He crouched down to Noah's eye level, something he rarely did in front of others, even Isabella. I will always come for you, Noah. Always. You understand that, don't you? I know, Noah said. But something in his tone suggested the reassurance didn't fully reach the place of fear the incident had opened within him. He fiddled with his mother's compass, which sat beside his juice glass, the worn silver reflecting the morning light. Julian glanced at his watch. Our guest will be here soon. There's something I want to show you first. He gestured for Noah to follow him to his study. Isabella watched them go, worry creasing her brow. Ese niño necesita más que palabras, she murmured to herself. That child needs more than words, as she turned back to her cooking. The study was a testament to Julian's carefully curated lifebook shelves, filled with first editions awards and commemorative photos displayed with precision, not a paper out of place on the antique desk. The scent of leather-bound books and the faint trace of Julian's sandalwood cologne permeated the air. He moved to a cabinet behind his desk, unlocking it with a small key from his pocket. I haven't opened this since your mother died, he told Noah, who watched with widening eyes. The key turned with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet room. From the cabinet, Julian removed a silver-framed photograph and held it reverently for a moment before passing it to his son. Noah took it with careful hands, his fingers trembling slightly. The glass was cool against his skin, the frame heavy and substantial. The photo showed a much younger Julian and Olivia at what appeared to be a garden party. Olivia, beautiful and radiant, her smile lighting the frame, had her arm linked through that of an elegant older woman, whose regal bearing was softened by the affectionate way she looked at Olivia. Bright flowers bloomed in the background, and sunlight dappled the scene with golden highlights. Who is she? Noah asked, pointing to the older woman, his finger leaving a small smudge on the glass that Julian resisted the urge to wipe away. Judge Victoria Harlow. Julian answered the name, feeling strange on his tongue after so long. Your mother's godmother. She was like a second mother to Olivia after your grandmother died. Noah studied the photo intently, his eyes drinking in the details of his mother, the tilt of her head, the way her hand rested on the older woman's arm, the bright blue of her eyes that Noah had inherited. I think I remember her from the funeral. Julian nodded, the memory of that rain-soaked day still painfully vivid. She was there. She held your hand during the service. Why haven't I seen her since? The question landed like a stone in still water rippling through Julian's conscience. His son's directness, so like Olivia's, never failed to catch him off guard. How to explain to a 9-year-old that grief can make adults behave irrationally? That sometimes cutting ties feels easier than maintaining connections that remind you of what you've lost? That's my fault. Julian admitted, the words costing him more than he'd expected. After your mother died, I closed our world focused only on you and the company. I thought it was the right thing to do. But now you don't. Noah's perception, as always, cut straight to the heart of things. His eyes. Olivia's eyes seeing too much. Now I think I made a mistake. Julian said, the admission surprisingly freeing. Your mother would have wanted you to know. Judge Harlow to know all the people who loved her. Noah traced his mother's face in the photograph, his small finger lingering on her smile. Is she our guest today? Yes. She saw the video from the plane. She called me. Understanding dawned on Noah's face, his expression shifting through surprise, curiosity, and something like hope. She's coming because of what happened. She's coming because she cares about you, Julian corrected gently. Because you're her godson, because she loved your mother, and because sometimes when difficult things happen, family comes together. The intercom buzzed, the sound startling in the quiet room. Isabella's voice came through. Mr. Montgomery, Judge Harlow has arrived. Julian watched a mixture of emotions cross his son's face. Curiosity, uncertainty, a flicker of anticipation. Ready. Noah took a deep breath, squared his shoulders in unconscious mimicry of his father, and nodded. Ready. They walked together to the foyer, where Victoria Harlow stood elegant in a tailored pantsuit, her silver hair swept into a simple chignon. Despite her 68 years, she carried herself with the straight-backed authority of someone who had spent decades commanding courtrooms. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, went immediately to Noah, softening with a complex mixture of emotions. "Hello, Noah," she said, her voice warm but dignified. "The last time I saw you, you were about this tall." She held her hand at waist height. "You've grown." Noah studied her carefully, looking from her face to the photo, still clutched in his hand, and back again. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by something deeper, a connection to a past he barely remembered, but desperately missed. "You're in this picture with my mom," he said finally, his voice smaller than usual. Victoria stepped forward, looking at the photograph. A small gasp escaped her. "Olivia's 35th birthday," she said softly, "at the Botanical Gardens." She looked up at Julian, surprise and gratitude in her eyes at this unexpected opening. "Would you like to see more pictures?" Noah asked suddenly, animation entering his voice for the first time since the plane incident. "I have an album in my room." Victoria's composed expression wavered, emotion briefly overcoming her judicial reserve. "I would like that very much." As Noah led her toward his bedroom, Julian watched them go with a mixture of emotions he couldn't quite name. The scent of Victoria's perfume, the same she'd worn for decades, lingered in the air, bringing with it memories of holiday dinners, legal discussions over wine, and Olivia's laughter. It felt like the breaking of a dam he'd built around their lives, terrifying but also somehow right. Isabella appeared at his elbow, a knowing look in her eyes. "Breakfast is ready when you are, Mr. Montgomery." "Let them have some time," Julian said, still watching the doorway through which his son and Olivia's godmother had disappeared. "This is more important than waffles." Isabella smiled, patting his arm in a familiar gesture she would never have attempted before today. "Si, señor. Much more important." In Noah's meticulously organized room, a surprise awaited Victoria. On the boys' bookshelf, alongside volumes on science, history, and business, sat a framed photo she'd never seen before, Olivia holding a newborn. Noah, her face alight with joy, exhaustion, and fierce love. "Your mother was so beautiful," Victoria said, her voice catching. She touched the frame gently, as if she might somehow reach through the glass to the woman captured there. Noah watched her carefully, hunger for information about his mother evident in his expression. "Dad says I have her eyes." "You do?" Victoria confirmed, studying him with open affection. "And her kindness. I could see that in how you handled yourself on that plane." Noah looked down, embarrassment and pride warring in his expression. "You saw the video I did." Victoria sat on the edge of his bed, patting the space beside her. The mattress dipped slightly under her weight, the blue comforter wrinkling beneath them. When Noah joined her, she continued, "It reminded me of something that happened to your mother once." Noah's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and interest. "Mom, someone was mean to her like that." "Yes, when she was clerking for me before she met your father. A lawyer thought she was the cleaning staff instead of a Harvard law graduate." Victoria smiled sadly at the memory, the indignity of that moment, still fresh after all these years. "Do you know what she did?" Noah shook his head, hungry for this new information about his mother, leaning forward slightly in his eagerness. "She didn't get angry. She didn't even correct him directly. She simply wrote the most brilliant legal analysis I'd ever seen from a clerk, and had me deliver it to him personally." Victoria's eyes twinkled with the memory lines crinkling at the corners. The look on his face when he realized who had written it was priceless. Your mother knew the best revenge is excellence. Noah absorbed this, connecting it to his own experience. Is that why you came today? To tell me that I came because I've missed too much of your life already, Victoria said simply, emotion making her voice huskier than usual. And because I thought perhaps you might need someone who knew your mother well. Someone who could tell you stories about her that even your father might not know. Something hungry and hopeful flashed in Noah's eyes. Like what? Like how she once organized a sit-in at her law school to protest the lack of female authors in the curriculum, or how she could recite all of The Raven from memory, which she did at a Halloween party standing on a table, making everyone scream with her dramatic delivery. Victoria's smile widened at the memory. Or that she loved peanut butter and pickle sandwiches. Noah wrinkled his nose momentarily, just a normal 9-year-old boy. Gross. Indeed, Victoria laughed, the sound warming the room. Your father agreed with you. He could never understand that particular preference. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the city below. Noah fiddled with the edge of his comforter, gathering courage for his next question. My dad is really angry about what happened, he said, finally his voice dropping to near whisper. Victoria nodded, unsurprised. Of course he is. He loves you very much. I think he's going to do something to that man. Something bad. The perception in the child's voice confirmed Victoria's concerns from her conversation with Julian. Her judicial instincts, honed by decades on the bench, recognized the weight of the statement. What makes you think that? Noah looked up at her, his eyes too knowing for his years. Because I heard him on the phone last night. He said, make sure it's legal, but barely. And his voice was like when someone at the company makes a big mistake. Victoria considered this information carefully, mentally calculating how to navigate the complex loyalties involved. Your father is a powerful man who believes in protecting what's his. But Noah prompted, sensing the unspoken reservation, his perceptiveness again reminding Victoria painfully of Olivia. There's a difference between justice and revenge, Victoria said gently, choosing her words with judicial care. Justice heals. Revenge furthers the cycle of harm. Noah mulled this over, his brow furrowing in concentration. Which one would my mom want? The question, so simple yet so profound, caught Victoria off guard. Before she could answer, Julian appeared in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. Breakfast is getting cold, he said, his eyes taking in the tableau of his son and Judge Harlow, sitting close together on the bed, surrounded by photos of Olivia. Something in his face shifted, a softening, a recognition, perhaps even a hint of longing for the connection they represented. Isabella says the pancakes can be reheated whenever you're ready, Noah replied, his eyes moving between his father and Victoria, assessing their dynamic with childlike directness. Noah looked from his father to Victoria and back again. Can Judge Harlow come for breakfast again sometime? She was telling me stories about Mom. The request hung in the air between the adults. A child's simple wish, bridging years of estrangement, opening a door that Julian had firmly closed. Julian met Victoria's gaze, reading both challenge and hope in her eyes. The scent of breakfast wafted in from the kitchen, mingling with the faint trace of Victoria's perfume and the lingering ghost of Olivia's presence that seemed stronger somehow, with Victoria in the room. I think that could be arranged, he said finally, the words, both concession and offering. If the judge is willing. Victoria stood, her posture straight, but her expression warm. I'm free every Sunday, she said, a subtle gauntlet thrown, a commitment requested. And in that moment, as Noah beamed between them, something shifted in the Montgomery household. A crack in the fortress Julian had built around his son and himself, letting in light from a past he'd tried too hard to contain. What none of them realized yet was how crucial this newly forged alliance would become in the days ahead, as William Barnes's punishment took an unexpected turn, and the viral video spiraled into a national conversation that would put the Montgomery family at the center of a storm none of them anticipated. 3 days after the plane incident, as media coverage continued to swirl around the viral video, Julian sat in his home office, reviewing reports on the fallout. The leather of his chair creaked softly as he shifted position, the scent of lemon polish and old books, creating a familiar, comforting atmosphere that contrasted with the digital chaos unfolding on his screens. Barnes's resignation from Mercer Financial had made headlines in the business press. The airline had issued a formal apology to Noah and announced a review of their customer service policies. Social media remained ablaze with discussions about privilege race and how children should be treated in public spaces. All of this was proceeding according to Julian's meticulously crafted response plan. What wasn't part of the plan was the phone call from Victoria that had just ended. Eleanor Preston is scheduled for a primetime interview on National tonight, she had informed him. 7 o'clock. You should watch it with Noah. Now, as the hour approached, Julian found himself in the living room with his son, the television tuned to the news channel. The soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant sounds of traffic far below, and the occasional ping of Julian's phone created a subtle soundtrack to their anticipation. Noah sat beside him on the sofa, his expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He wore blue pajamas with small robots printed on them, a rare concession to his actual age rather than the mini-adult attire Julian usually preferred. In his hands, he held his mother's compass, his thumb rubbing the worn silver surface in a self-soothing gesture Julian had noticed becoming more frequent since the plane incident. Is this about what happened on the plane? Noah asked, his eyes fixed on the television screen where commercials were still playing. Julian nodded, the motion slightly stiff. Dr. Preston was the woman sitting across from you in first class. Apparently, she's going to talk about what she saw. Noah's fingers tightened around the compass, his knuckles whitening slightly. Will they show the video again? Probably. Julian admitted, disliking the flash of distress that crossed his son's face. But we don't have to watch if you don't want to. Noah squared his shoulders, determination replacing his momentary vulnerability. I want to. I need to know what people are saying. Pride swelled in Julian's chest at his son's courage. Before he could respond, the program began, the familiar theme music filling the room. After a brief introduction, the host welcomed Dr. Eleanor Preston to the studio. The camera panned to reveal the elegant older woman Noah remembered from the plane, now dressed in a tasteful navy suit, her silver hair styled in a sophisticated bob. Pearl earrings gleamed under the studio lights, and her posture was impeccable as she settled into the interview chair. Dr. Preston, you were an eyewitness to an incident that has sparked a national conversation. Can you tell us what you saw on that flight? Eleanor Preston's voice was clear and authoritative, carrying the gravitas of her credentials and experience. I observed a grown man verbally assault a 9-year-old child over an airline seat. I watched that child respond with more poise and maturity than his attacker could muster, and I saw a clear demonstration of the different America that black children must navigate compared to white children. Different America, the host prompted, leaning forward slightly. Yes, black children are often forced to develop a kind of armor, a composure beyond their years, because society doesn't allow them the luxury of childish outbursts or normal developmental behaviors. Dr. Preston's hands moved expressively as she spoke, her gold rings catching the studio lights. Noah Montgomery sat in that seat with the weight of that knowledge on his small shoulders. Julian glanced at his son, who was watching the screen with intense focus, his body completely still, except for his thumb still moving rhythmically over the compass. The mention of his name on national television had caused a slight widening of his eyes, but otherwise he maintained the composure Dr. Preston was describing. As a pediatrician who practiced for over 40 years, Dr. Preston continued. I can tell you that children internalize these moments of public humiliation deeply. They seek to understand why they were targeted, often concluding there must be something wrong with them. For children of color, these incidents compound over time, creating psychological wounds that we as a society must address. Noah shifted slightly closer to Julian on the sofa, the movement so subtle it might have been unconscious. Julian hesitated, then placed his arm around his son's shoulders. To his surprise, Noah leaned into the touch rather than maintaining his usual careful distance. The video shows Noah offering to give up his seat, the host noted. That seems remarkably mature for a child his age. Dr. Preston nodded, her earrings catching the light with the movement. It was. And it speaks to what I'm describing. That young boy was willing to surrender his rightful place to appease an adult who was treating him abominably. That's not just good manners, that's a survival strategy. Black children learn early. Always be the bigger person. Never show anger. De-escalate at all costs. Julian felt a tightness in his chest, a physical manifestation of the pain these truths caused. Dr. Preston was articulating exactly what he and Olivia had discussed many times, the unfair burden placed on their son to navigate a world that would often judge him by his skin before his character. What responsibility do bystanders have in situations like this? The host asked. An enormous one. Dr. Preston replied firmly, her expression hardening slightly. I intervened, but not until the situation had already escalated. We all need to speak up sooner. Silence in the face of such behavior is complicity. The interview continued with Dr. Preston speaking eloquently about the airline's handling of the situation, the psychological impact of public humiliation on children, and the broader implications for how America discusses race with children. At no point did she mention Julian or Nexus Quantum, specifically focusing instead on Noah as a child, not an heir to a corporate empire. When the segment ended, Julian muted the television and turned to Noah. The boy's face was thoughtful, his eyes reflecting the blue glow from the screen. What did you think? Noah was quiet for a moment, processing. The compass in his hands continued its slow rotation between his fingers. She understood, he said finally, his voice soft but steady. About why I offered to move. About how it felt. Julian nodded, the weight of Dr. Preston's insights settling over him. She seems to understand a lot of things. Dad, Noah said hesitantly, looking up at his father with an expression that seemed both vulnerable and determined. What are you going to do to Mr. Barnes? The directness of the question caught Julian off guard. He had been careful to shield Noah from the details of his response strategy, conducting most of his planning behind closed doors or late at night. What makes you think I'm going to do anything to him? Noah gave his father a look far too knowing for his 9 years, doubt clear in his expression. Because I know you. Because he hurt me. Because that's what you do when someone threatens something you care about. Julian sighed, recognizing the futility of pretense with his perceptive son. I'm handling the situation. Handling it how Noah pressed, setting the compass down on the coffee table and turning to face his father fully. Like that supplier who tried to steal our encryption algorithm. Or like the reporter who wrote those lies about Mom after the accident. Julian winced at the memories. His reputation for ruthlessly dismantling those who crossed him was apparently well known, even to his son. The supplier had lost his company and faced federal charges. The reporter had never worked in journalism again after Julian finished with him. Noah, some people need to face consequences for their actions. What Barnes did was wrong on many levels. I know it was wrong. Noah agreed, his voice steady. But, he hesitated, gathering his thoughts. But what? But destroying him won't make me feel better, Noah said quietly, his eyes so like Olivia's, filled with a wisdom beyond his years. It won't fix what happened. The statement hung in the air between them, challenging Julian's entire approach. The room suddenly felt too warm, the walls too close. Outside, city lights twinkled against the night sky, a stark contrast to the emotional complexity unfolding within the penthouse. "What would make you feel better?" Julian asked finally, genuinely curious about his son's perspective. Noah considered this seriously, his brow furrowing in concentration. "I think I'd want him to understand why what he did was wrong. Not just lose his job and be hated on the internet, but really understand." Before Julian could respond, his phone rang. Victoria's name flashed on the screen, the coincidence almost eerie given the direction of their conversation. "I assume you watched," she said, when he answered her judicial crispness, softened by a note of warmth. "We did. Eleanor would like to meet Noah. She has an idea she thinks might help him process what happened. Would you be open to that?" Julian glanced at his son, who was watching him with curious eyes. The boy's words about understanding rather than destruction still echoed in his mind. The old Julian would have refused immediately, protecting his son from any outside influence, keeping their world tightly controlled. But something had shifted in him since the incident. A recognition that his fortress approach had left Noah vulnerable in ways he hadn't anticipated. When he asked instead, noting the slight widening of Noah's eyes at this departure from his usual caution. Victoria's surprise was audible in the brief pause before she answered. "Tomorrow afternoon, I could bring her to the penthouse." Julian covered the phone's mouthpiece. "Dr. Preston would like to meet you. The woman from the plane and the interview. Would you be okay with that?" Noah nodded without hesitation, a spark of interest lighting his eyes. "Yes, I'd like to thank her for helping me." "Tomorrow at 2, Julian told Victoria. "And Victoria, thank you." After he hung up, Noah looked at him with a hint of a smile. "Mom would be proud of you for that." Julian raised an eyebrow, surprised by the observation. "For what?" "For letting people in. She always said you built walls too easily." The observation, so reminiscent of Olivia, caught Julian by surprise. He hadn't realized how much of his wife's wisdom Noah had absorbed in his short time with her. The pain of her absence, usually a dull, persistent ache, suddenly flared, but alongside it came a warm recognition that pieces of her lived on in their son. "Your mother was very smart," he said softly, allowing himself a small, genuine smile. The smartest, Noah agreed. Then, with the mercurial shift of childhood, he changed subjects. "Can we have ice cream?" Julian checked his watch. 9:30 p.m. on a school night. The old Julian would have refused, automatically citing nutrition and schedules. Instead, he found himself saying, "With sprinkles." Noah's face lit up with genuine delight, his eyes widening in surprise. "Really? Really? I think we both deserve a treat after this week." As they headed to the kitchen, Julian realized that the day's events had shifted something fundamental in their relationship. His son was teaching him as much as he was teaching Noah about resilience, about forgiveness, about what truly mattered in the wake of injustice. And in the back of his mind, a new approach to William Barnes began to take shape, one that might satisfy both justice and his son's need for genuine understanding, rather than mere retribution. Long after Noah had gone to bed, Julian stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, looking out over the glittering Manhattan skyline. The city sprawled before him, a tapestry of lights and shadows, power and vulnerability. Rain had begun to fall again, drops streaking down the glass and fracturing the view like shattered diamonds. In his hand, he held a glass of 18-year-old Macallan Olivia's favorite scotch. The amber liquid caught the light as he swirled it gently, releasing its complex aroma of vanilla oak and spice. He rarely drank it now, saving it for moments when he needed to feel close to her memory. Tonight was such a night. On his desk lay two competing documents illuminated by the soft glow of his desk lamp. The first was a comprehensive strategy from his legal team outlining the discrimination lawsuit they were preparing against Barnes, a legal sledgehammer that would not only bankrupt the man, but ensure he never worked in finance again. The document detailed Barnes' vulnerabilities: a second mortgage taken out 3 years ago, a son's struggling business. He had personally guaranteed a messy divorce settlement from his first marriage that had left his finances precariously balanced. The second document was Victoria's proposal for a different approach, a moderated dialogue between Barnes and Noah, facilitated by Dr. Preston, aimed at education and understanding rather than punishment. This strategy emphasized transformation over retribution, healing over vengeance. Julian took another sip of scotch, letting the familiar burn ground him as his mind churned with conflicting impulses. Rain tapped against the windows with increasing intensity, matching his internal turbulence. His phone buzzed with a text from Miguel Barnes, retained Winston from Kirby & Associates this morning, preparing wrongful termination suit against Mercer. Our sources indicate he's also researching Nexus Quantum vulnerabilities. Julian shook his head, a humorless smile twisting his lips. Even now, Barnes was thinking only of himself, refusing to acknowledge the harm he'd caused. It reinforced Julian's instinct to crush the man completely. After all, wasn't that the most effective deterrent? Make an example of Barnes so that others would think twice before targeting Noah in the future. And yet, Noah's words echoed in his mind. Destroying him won't make me feel better. It won't fix what happened. Julian moved to his desk and opened a drawer, withdrawing a small leather-bound book, Olivia's journal. The leather was soft from handling the pages slightly yellowed at the edges. He'd only read it once after her death, the pain too raw to revisit her innermost thoughts. But tonight he found himself turning to a passage he remembered, one she'd written when Noah was just 5 years old. He ran his fingers over her handwriting, feeling the slight indentations where her pen had pressed into the paper, creating a physical connection across time and loss. Today at the park, a woman pulled her daughter away when she tried to play with Noah. Olivia had written her script flowing and decisive, much like the woman herself. It was subtle. She made an excuse about needing to leave, but the message was clear. Julian wanted to confront her, but I stopped him. Not because it wasn't wrong. It was, but because the confrontation wouldn't change her heart. It would only confirm her biases. The real work is slower, harder. It's about creating spaces where transformation becomes possible. Julian closed the journal, feeling the weight of Olivia's absence acutely. The scent of her perfume seemed to rise from the page's jasmine amber, and something uniquely her. What would she advise now? How would she balance justice with the opportunity for genuine change? He picked up his phone and dialed Victoria's number despite the late hour. She answered on the second ring, her voice alert, despite it being nearly midnight. "Julian, is everything all right? I've been thinking about your proposal," he said without preamble, watching raindrops race down the glass, merging and separating in unpredictable patterns. This facilitated dialogue with Barnes, and her voice carried none of the impatience another person might have expressed at such a late call. "It seems inadequate. After what he did, a conversation feels like letting him off too easily." Victoria was quiet for a moment, the silence filled with the soft sound of pages turning. She was likely reviewing case notes, a habit from her judicial days that had followed her into retirement. "May I speak frankly?" "Always. You're thinking like a CEO, not a father." The question isn't what punishment Barnes deserves. It's what Noah needs to heal from this experience. Julian bristled at the implication, his grip tightening on the phone. "I am thinking as a father. I want Noah to see that actions have consequences, that he doesn't have to accept mistreatment." And those are important lessons. Victoria agreed, her tone softening slightly. But there's another lesson equally valuable, that transformation is possible, that hate isn't the final word. Julian moved back to the window, watching the city below. The rain had intensified, sheets of water now obscuring the view. Olivia would say something similar. He admitted the words, both acknowledgement and surrender. She would. Victoria confirmed, a smile evident in her voice, despite the lateness of the hour. She always believed in the possibility of change, even when it seemed unlikely. That's what made her such an exceptional advocate. She could see beyond retribution to restoration. Julian sighed, the sound mixing with the pattering rain. Barnes doesn't deserve that kind of opportunity. Perhaps not, Victoria said carefully, a rustle indicating she had sat up in bed. But Noah deserves to see that there are multiple ways to respond to injustice. Right now, he's watching you closely, Julian. The path you choose will shape how he understands power, justice, and his own worth more profoundly than any words you could say to him. The truth of her observation struck Julian deeply. Noah was indeed watching, learning from his father's example how to wield power, how to respond when wronged. Was vengeance truly the lesson he wanted to impart? Or could there be strength in a different approach, one that honored Olivia's vision, as well as his own need to protect? From down the hall came a soft sound. Noah turning in his sleep, the creak of his bed frame audible in the quiet penthouse. The knowledge that his son was sleeping peacefully, at least for tonight, grounded Julian in what truly mattered. "I need to think about this," Julian said finally. "Of course. But don't overthink it. Sometimes the heart knows what the mind overcomplicates." After they hung up, Julian returned to his desk and pulled up the security dossier on William Barnes. He read it carefully, looking not just for vulnerabilities to exploit, but for something deeper, indications of who the man truly was, beyond the ugly moment captured on video. Barnes had been with Mercer Financial for 30 years, rising from a middle-class background through ambition and ruthless determination. His personnel file showed a man focused on achievement, but also noted for mentoring younger colleagues. He'd divorced, once remarried to Amanda Barnes, a high school English teacher, whose modest salary stood in stark contrast to Barnes's executive compensation. 2 daughters, both successful professionals. 4 grandchildren, whose photographs decorated his office desk. More interesting were his charitable contributions, regular donations to conservative political causes, but also, surprisingly, to educational charities, particularly ones focused on financial literacy for underserved communities. Annual volunteer work as a finance coach for a youth entrepreneurship program in the Bronx. A complex picture emerged, not of a cartoon villain, but of a man whose prejudices coexisted with what appeared to be genuine concern for education and opportunity. It was this contradiction that caught Julian's attention. A man who could volunteer with underprivileged youth, but still see a black child as an interloper in first class. What did that reveal about the nature of bias, about the compartmentalization of values? Could such a man be capable of genuine reflection, of meaningful change? Julian wasn't certain, but as he looked toward Noah's bedroom, he found himself wondering if the greater risk was in offering Barnes a chance at redemption he might not deserve, or in denying Noah the opportunity to witness, and perhaps even facilitate a transformation that could heal wounds deeper than the incident itself. He picked up his phone again and began typing a message to his legal team. The strategy would change, but the objective remained the same: justice. Not vengeance, not retribution, but true justice, the kind that changes hearts as well as circumstances. What shape that justice would take was still forming in Julian's mind, but he knew now that it would need to satisfy both the CEO and the father in him, the protector and the healer, the warrior and the wisdom seeker. Olivia would expect nothing less. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this powerful message with others who might benefit from it. Your support helps us create more stories that challenge, inspire, and remind us that even in our most painful moments, we have the power to write a different ending, one that ripples outward with healing rather than harm. Remember, each of us has the opportunity to choose how we respond to injustice, both as targets and as witnesses. Will we seek punishment or transformation? Will we retreat behind walls or build bridges of understanding? Leave a comment below, sharing your own experiences with moments of prejudice that were transformed into something positive, or how you've witnessed someone stand up with dignity in the face of discrimination. Your stories matter, and together we can create a community of growth and healing. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.